So my hot take is that I sometimes think that we approach road mapping in a bit of an upside down way. Rather than trying to come up with what are all of the things that we need to build to succeed, we could think of it the other way and we could create a roadmap of what are all the things that need to be true for us to succeed. As in, what are all the things that will bite us in the ass if we don't get them right?
Hello and welcome to another episode of One Night in Product Hot Takes Edition, where I speak to one person about one thing, get straight to the point and find out what's on their mind. If you'd like to share what's on your mind with me and the world, why not head over to onenightinproduct.com/hot, where you can find a time, book a slot, come and talk to me, and we'll do just that. But in any case, do remember to subscribe to the podcast on your favourite podcast app or find us on YouTube, like, subscribe, share, all of that good stuff, and make sure you never miss another episode again. But anyway, enough of me. Let's get straight to Jordan Dalladay's hot take. All right, so all I can see in front of me is a blackboard covered with stickies and chalk writing and lots of complicated looking diagrams, but I can also see a person. So hello person, who are you? Where are you based? What do you do? And more importantly, what's your hot take?
Thank you very much, Jason. So my name is Jordan. I'm a product strategist and leader as well. And what I do, I work with startup founders to really help them take kind of big, bold, and ambitious, even, sort of audacious ideas, and help them get those ideas from paper into market and turn them into success stories as well. And I do this by trying to bring many years of experience about how to develop practical and quite pragmatic approaches to thinking about product in the sort of short, medium, and long term, as well as an understanding of how to build teams that are effective and can drive towards specific business goals and outcomes to drag a vision kicking and screaming into reality.
And what's your hot take?
My hot take. So my hot take is that I sometimes think that we approach road mapping in a bit of an upside down way. And what I'd say here is that rather than trying to come up with what are all of the things that we need to build to succeed, we could think of it the other way and we could create a roadmap of what are all the things that need to be true for us to succeed? As in, what are all the things that will bite us in the ass if we don't get them right? And this inversion is what I would kind of call like a risk-based product approach or a risk-based product strategy approach too. And by this, I mean, we start by kind of, looking at an idea and we try and identify like, what are the assumptions that we've made behind this? Like, what are the kind of key beliefs that we've put in that this will succeed, and start to challenge those and map those out. And sometimes those might be things that affect the desirability of a product, but it could also be things about its feasibility and its viability fundamentally as well. And by kind of starting to spend the time to really articulate where are our assumptions, where are the challenges that we're going to face, where are the risks, we can then take those and we can start to prioritize them. And we can prioritize them in sort of two dimensions. I think first dimension is how much uncertainty do we have behind this? How much do we really know? Is this assumption based on any evidence, or did we just kind of come at, was it just a belief that we were holding to that point? And on the other dimension, we can think about the impact of being right or wrong on those things as well. And that kind of gives us a lens that we can then start to say, well, how do we reduce the uncertainty of the most impactful challenges, risks, and assumptions that are sort of inherently baked into our idea, our vision, or even the next move that we want to make? And I find that the beauty of this approach, though it's a little bit contrarian, the beauty of this approach is that it can then help us build, I suppose, what you could call a bit like a learning roadmap. We can then sort of say, like, what's the next 5 experiments we want to run to actually start to sort of prove our way to product market fit by the back door. So if we prove all those experiments right, we should be much closer to actually having a desirable business that can also pay the bills as well, because we've worked on the fundamentally the highest uncertainty aspects of what's there too. But yeah, so it's sort of an inversion of the way that we would think traditionally about roadmaps, and almost blending a little bit of strategy, doing a bit of a seasoning of strategy on our sort of tactical short-term outlook to taking a product from sort of paper sort of into market as well.
But you call this like a contrarian take, and obviously maybe there are some things and some, I don't know, like certain aspects of what you do or what you propose that maybe are contrarian, but it certainly feels like it's not that contrarian to talk about some of the things that you've talked about. Like if you read a lot of the big books around like how to build products effectively, they're all talking about validating assumptions and sorting out your product risks and making sure that you do experiments and you kind of, again, as you say, as you put it, like do the learning so that you're not just sitting there cranking out features, but you're actually trying to work out what the most important and most valuable opportunities are that you can take out to the market and solve problems. So, like, I'm not going to sit there and say that I disagree with doing any of those things, but is it really a contrarian take, or is it just that it's kind of a summarization of what people are already supposed to be doing, but they're just not doing it?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely somewhere in the middle of that. And I think that the key thing is, from a lot of the startups that I work with as well, there's never really a moment, or people have never really taken the time to actually sit down and say, what are the assumptions that we've put into this, and really try and unpack them in a more systematic way as well. And then focus on, trying to articulate that path of learning. And then almost kind of, you can take it, sometimes the mantra I use is this idea of how do we design to test? So rather than, to design, and it comes from this idea that it's much easier to design a good experiment than to design a great product. But a good experiment does give you the insights into what that great product can be. And so maybe rather than a contrarian view, there is kind of a bit of a mind shift, a mind shift that happens, mindset shift that can happen in that way as well.
But do you think, though, that this is something that product managers in general maybe either don't know how to do, don't want to do, or think that there's a better way? Or do you think that they're maybe in some organizations almost being prevented from doing it? When you talk about experiments, I'm sitting there thinking, well, yeah, I've worked in places where the idea of going up to the CEO saying, oh, I want to do some experiments, like that's the last thing they want. They just want to crank stuff out because the sales team said.
Yeah.
So is it that they're being prevented from doing it, or is it that there's some kind of knowledge gap or approach gap that needs to be bridged?
Yeah, so I think the two contexts that are interesting here are, for a lot of very early stage businesses, they often don't have product talent or product capabilities on board. It's an investment to get that. And you often have founders, you might have sort of technical founders, non-technical founders that are not necessarily born in that culture. And they might also not be aware of some of the more established literature around sort of product management theories as well.
But do they have to be? I mean, they're running a business, right? Like, who needs to
Yeah.
be reading all these books as a founder that's never done this sort of thing before? They've got other things to worry about, surely.
Yeah, no, of course. And building a business is a lot of, there's a lot of moving parts. But actually, the great thing about taking the assumptions-based sort of approach is that you can break out of just thinking about, the product we're trying to build, and you can actually apply it to the product business that we're trying to build as well. So you can include, operational challenges that might come up, regulatory challenges, how are we going to sort of operate and serve this sort of up in effective ways. You can include marketing in that as well. But then on the other side, I think for larger, more established sort of businesses, there is definitely this bias towards certainty, even if that certainty is just words on a slide. But the problem with that is it also creates expectations, and it creates, I've seen many times words were written on a slide very much as words on a slide, but then became things that had to be delivered just because they were articulated in that format as well. And in that way, I find that sometimes the language around de-risking or burning down risk can be quite a useful way to convince sort of more, sort of business leaders in large organizations to kind of understand the approach as well. So we're saying, like, we've got a clear outcome. And if we reduce the risk on the inputs, hopefully then the outputs kind of line themselves up towards that outcome in a more consistent way than what we'd see before.
All right, so let's assume that we can somehow persuade people. And, to be fair, I'm a big fan of using non-product words to resonate product concepts with non-product people, like you say, risk and due diligence and assumptions, I think is, maybe sort of getting a bit more producty in a way, but like it's still, they're words that people understand, right? They're not getting too far up our own kind of onto our own cloud of product management. But like, what's a practical kind of starting point? Like if someone is, for example, sitting there in like a feature factory and they're just banging away at the features as we just sort of described, how can they take a concrete step towards moving in that direction where they can start to validate those assumptions and start to invert things, as you put it?
Yeah. So I think, I mean, the first part is to actually try and write down the assumptions explicitly as well. So to take that step back from blending together the problem and the solution into a pipeline of, let's say, that's feeding the feature factory. Instead, it's almost just first of all taking that time and saying, like, what are the big assumptions that we've made, and how much impact can those assumptions have on the outcome that we're trying to achieve? And then that leaves 2 points, and it depends. Is the outcome itself already defined or not? If not, it's probably a good starting point to say, well, what actually does success look like for this? Our feature factory should be trying to drive towards something. And at the same time, almost then doing a bit of a reflection too on, what's fundamentally the problem that we are trying to address as well. Because, I sometimes use the analogy of sort of fishing. Like, you want to make sure you're fishing in a promising area first, and then we can worry about sort of what bait we want to use to see if we can get the value out of it as well.
All right. So I'm sure that you don't want to give away too many secrets, or you've got NDAs and stuff like that. But have you got like a concrete example of where you've gone out to an organization or somewhere you've worked in the past or wherever you did it, and you kind of took someone from A to B, and the benefits that you kind of got out the back of that, like the lightning version of that, what happened there?
Yeah. So I do have a few, and again, confidentiality is the tricky part with a lot of these.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but it is something that I use with the various startups that I help. This is a method that I always encourage, as the starting point for that journey. Sometimes they're already a bit further down the line. Sometimes they're starting from scratch. But actually sitting, and especially with those startups that don't have either people with product experience or sort of capacity to hire product people at their current stage, just spending, and it doesn't take long. It can just take a couple of hours, just sit down and start to say, like, what are the big assumptions? What are the big risks? What needs to be true for us to be successful, and how do we increase the certainty that the approach itself we're taking is going to deliver those as well.
But certainty is an interesting one, or confidence, as I might put it, if we put it into the context of things like RICE and all these sort of numeric frameworks that people try to use to, somehow magically prioritize everything. But the idea of confidence is an interesting one, right? Or certainty is, because you have some leaders out there that are just incredibly certain people. They just believe, and they're obviously also the people with the kind of the biggest voice in the room to some extent. So have you found a way to calibrate for that confidence so that you're not just kind of being brushed aside or having all of your assumptions brushed aside because someone's so sure that they believe the assumptions to be true and they kind of won't take any dissenting views?
Yeah, so I think in those instances, I generally find this is why you kind of have to go on the journey with people. So, you bring them into those exercises and get them also to try and reflect on, and if they seem really uncertain, it's just change the words until you find something that sticks. It's just like, so what might go wrong? Like, what could be the challenge? You eventually find that, in the end, everyone has worries. They might be closely held to their chest, but they'll have some nagging doubts. And it's amazing that once you get them through that process, then the alignment later on becomes so much easier because you've established the sense of, how we always look to get, and it doesn't need to be like 100% certainty. I think the key thing is, like, how do we move things out of the danger zone where, they're likely to have a big impact and we have, very little certainty. How do we drag them into an area? So, sometimes I use the term minimum viable certainty. So, like,
that's going to get used and misused by everyone.
But the question is, you can almost propose that as a challenge. Like, what's the least amount of information you need to know to be able to move forward with confidence on this? Because it's also very easy to hit the opposite extreme and just spend all your time de-risking everything to the nth degree, and then still not having moved any sort of step forwards in the process.
Well, sometimes you've got to make a bet, right? But We're coming to the end of our time together, but where can people come and find you if they want to talk about any of the stuff they've heard here, or just generally have a chat or try and work out what's on your post-it notes?
Yeah. So, always free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well. You can find me Jordan Dalladay. I'll pop up in the search, or you can check out my company. It's called Inherent.Ventures. You can just pop it into the URL bar, and it will sort of pop up for you.
Excellent. Well, I'm sure a few people will do just that. Well, Jordan, it's been absolutely fantastic. So thanks very much for coming, and thanks very much for your hot take.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.